This is every experimental German armored vehicle of the Second World War, from light reconnaissance prototypes to super-heavy breakthrough machines, from unconventional propulsion systems to improvised anti-aircraft and tank destroyer platforms. In total, dozens of experimental designs were conceived, constructed or tested under wartime conditions. Some represented advanced engineering solutions, others reflected industrial strain, material shortages, and strategic desperation as the conflict progressed. Early war experimental light and reconnaissance vehicles. Germany's experimental armor development began with light vehicles intended to refine mobility, suspension, and reconnaissance doctrine. Panzer IAUSF CVK 6.01 was an experimental light tank designed for high-speed reconnaissance rather than direct combat. It featured a torsion bar suspension and improved armor for its size. Limited numbers were produced and saw brief operational use, but its armament was insufficient for evolving battlefield threats. Panzer IAUSF FVK 18.01 was conceived as a heavily armored infantry support variant of the Panzer I. Armor thickness was increased significantly while retaining the same machine gun armament. The design proved impractical due to poor combat effectiveness and minimal tactical value. Like Traktorian Metal and Krupp were early experimental tanks developed before the war to test turret layouts, suspension, and gun mounting. Armed with short-barreled 37mm guns, these vehicles never entered production. They served primarily as engineering testbeds that informed later Panzer development. Medium tank prototypes and PRE series designs. As combat requirements intensified, experimental medium tanks became a focus of German armored research. VK 30.01H was an experimental medium tank developed as a precursor to the Tiger program. It featured sloped armor concepts and a 75mm gun. The design was ultimately surpassed by heavier alternatives and did not enter series production. VK 30.02DB was Daimler-Benz's competing Panther design proposal. It incorporated diesel propulsion and a layout inspired by Soviet T-34 architecture. Despite favorable mobility, it was rejected in favor of the MAN design due to logistical and manufacturing concerns. Panther AUSF F. Schmaltem represented an experimental late-war refinement of the Panther series. It introduced a narrower turret with improved armor geometry and optical systems. Production was planned but never realized before the war's end. Super heavy and breakthrough tank projects. Germany's most ambitious experimental vehicles were designed to achieve battlefield dominance through extreme armor and firepower. Panzerkampfwagen 8 MAUs was the heaviest fully enclosed armored fighting vehicle ever constructed. Weighing nearly 188 tons, it mounted a 128mm main gun paired with a coaxial 75mm cannon. Only 2 prototypes were built, and mobility limitations prevented operational deployment. E-100 was an experimental super heavy tank developed under the standardized E-Series program. Intended as a simplified alternative to the MAUs, it emphasized modularity and industrial efficiency. The chassis was incomplete at war's end, and the vehicle never entered testing. LWE was a conceptual heavy tank project proposed as a lighter alternative to the MAUs. It existed only in design studies and was abandoned as impractical within wartime production constraints. Experimental tank destroyers and assault guns. Tank destroyer development produced numerous experimental configurations, often mounted on modified or obsolete chassis. Ferdinand VK 45.01P originated from Porsche's rejected Tiger design. Armed with an 88mm Pak 43 gun, it offered exceptional firepower and frontal armor. Mechanical unreliability and lack of defensive armament limited its effectiveness. Elephant was an upgraded version of the Ferdinand, incorporating a machine gun and improved optics. Despite enhancements, weight and maintenance demands remained problematic, restricting its operational flexibility. Jagdpanther II was an experimental heavy tank destroyer combining a Jagdpanther superstructure with heavier suspension components. Only limited prototypes were produced, and the design did not progress to mass manufacture. Sturmgeschütz TZ-4 vs Sorfba represented experimental configurations of assault guns on Panzer for chassis. These variants tested different armor layouts and weapon integrations. None advanced beyond evaluation stages. Anti-aircraft and multi-role experimental vehicles. The increasing threat from Allied air power prompted experimental self-propelled anti-aircraft designs. Flakpanzer 341 Sealion was an experimental anti-aircraft tank based on the Panther chassis. It featured an enclosed turret mounting twin 37mm cannons. Development was halted due to shifting priorities and resource shortages. Kugelblitz was a late-war experimental flakpanzer featuring a fully enclosed, rotating turret armed with twin 30mm autocannons. Limited PRE production units were completed, but it arrived too late to influence air defense outcomes. Ostwind II was an experimental refinement of the Ostwind anti-aircraft vehicle. It incorporated upgraded armament and improved crew protection. Production did not proceed beyond prototypes. Unconventional propulsion and engineering experiments. Several experimental vehicles explored unconventional engineering concepts to address mobility and terrain challenges. VS-KFZ 617 Minenruma was an experimental mine-clearing vehicle featuring massive steel rollers. Designed to detonate mines safely ahead of advancing troops, it proved mechanically complex and tactically inflexible. Landwasser Schlepper MID Panzeraufbau was an experimental amphibious armored transport. It combined tracked mobility with marine propulsion for river crossings. Limited testing occurred, but the concept was not expanded for combat use. Borgward 4SD KFZ 301 was a remotely controlled demolition vehicle designed to deliver explosive charges to fortified positions. Although deployed operationally, high loss rates and electronic vulnerabilities limited its effectiveness. Late war emergency and paper projects. As Germany's strategic situation deteriorated, experimental designs increasingly reflected urgency and simplification. E-10 was a proposed light tank destroyer within the E-series standardization effort. It emphasized low-profile, interchangeable components and ease of production. Development remained at the design stage. E-25 was a medium tank destroyer concept intended to replace existing Jagdpanzer designs. It featured sloped armor and a powerful anti-tank gun. No prototypes were completed before surrender. Rat Landcruiser P-1000 was a conceptual super heavy armored vehicle armed with naval-scale weaponry. The design existed only on paper and was wholly impractical for operational deployment. These experimental armored vehicles represent the full spectrum of German armored innovation during the Second World War, from practical testbeds that shaped later production models to extreme designs that exceeded industrial capability. Each vehicle reflected specific tactical, technological, or strategic pressures of its time. Collectively, they illustrate the evolution, ambition, and limitations of German armored engineering under prolonged total war conditions. This concludes the complete catalogue of every experimental German armored vehicle of the Second World War.